Hey everyone! So in today's video, I'm going to be answering the questions that you guys left both on a community post that I posted a couple weeks ago, and then one of my recent videos where I just asked if you guys had any questions about my garden, about Chicago in general. I thought it'd be a nice way to kind of wrap up the gardening season, seeing if there were any questions that you might have had about my garden. So I'm going to go through those today, and I think I'm going to start with the community post ones because I have a screenshot of those. So the first question that I have is, do you live in an apartment with patios for gardening or a house? I've seen you plant outside as well as in pots, so was just curious. So we do live in a house. This is actually our first home that is actually ours, so it's very exciting. But the only outdoor space are the decks. So we don't have a yard. Basically everything that's on the ground level is cement. So I mean, you have like a front yard, but I'd say we have maybe 3 to 4 feet of depth before the gate, and there's a cement sidewalk that wraps around like on our property, if that makes sense. And then there is, I'd say maybe like a 5 by 2 foot dirt area right in front of our house, but that has some, I think, boxwoods and a hydrangea, which has been there forever, so I leave those as is. I do have pots on the front stairs, but the only ground that I can actually plant in is our parkway. So that's where I moved down the spring bulbs from last year that were in the containers, or I guess that I planted last year, moved them down this year. So those I did dig up and then replant downstairs in the parkway. And the parkway is what I call the area that's between the sidewalk, the public sidewalk, and then the street. So that is the only place I have to actually plant plants in the ground. All the other outdoor space here is the decks. So that is why I have to container garden, but I actually really love it. The next question is, what dirt and fertilizer do you use and how often do you fertilize? So I use a bunch of different stuff. I don't really stick to like one specific brand. I basically get whatever's on hand when I go to a garden center and I know that I need a bag of dirt or a bag of compost. I don't even know like what the brands of potting soil are that I'll get. I think just again whatever is available, and then drag those all the way upstairs. For compost, again, I've used a bunch of different ones. The one that I know off the top of my head that I think I use the most, again, I don't know the brand name, but it's a chicken manure compost, and that seems to have worked really well. That I actually got a bunch of this spring from the Chesterton Feed and Garden Center, which is my hometown. So over in Indiana, I drove those all the way back in and again heaved them upstairs. As far as like liquid or granular fertilizers, I use a lot of Espoma, like the bulb tone, the biotone, just because Garden Answer said they worked, and so far they seem to work really well. And then liquid fertilizer, I think I have Espoma, but I think that's houseplant fertilizer. But Fox Farm is the main brand I use there. No real reason, it's just the first brand that I found online and ordered it, and I've just kind of been restocking that ever since. And then as far as how often, so I'll usually add compost to my raised beds right before I plant everything for the season. Then for the annuals, I'll go in about once a week, just make that a regular part of my schedule and fertilize those. And then things like my blueberries or my raspberries, which maybe only get fertilized once or twice a season, or if I have other things that I need to add, like soil acidifier for my blueberries, I just add those into my calendar on whatever the recommendation is, which I think it's once a month for the soil acidifier, but I'm not really sure. But yeah, I'm not really tied to any specific brand of anything unless I try it and it completely doesn't work and kills all of my plants, which has not happened yet, thankfully. But yeah, fertilizers, Fox Farm is the main brand I use, Espoma, chicken manure compost. Again, don't know the brand name for that, but that's basically what I do. And actually, I think I have a video that I did last year actually showing the bags of the products and kind of talking through them. So I'll link that down below. And you know what, that might be good to do for anything that kind of comes up that I know I have a separate video for. I will just link that down below so you can actually get more information than I'm providing today. Next is, have you ever visited a botanic garden and do you follow other YouTubers? Love your videos, love your garden, thank you very much. I have visited botanic gardens. So my favorite one is obviously Chicago's Botanic Garden. It's called the Chicago Botanic Garden, and I might be biased, but it is my favorite garden I've ever gone to. I think it might be the largest one I've visited as well, but it's huge. If you're in Chicago, I definitely recommend going. I'd recommend going in like the summer to fall and not so much in the winter, but they do have a really pretty lightscape, which is a light show in the winter as well around Christmas time. But definitely go there when most things are in bloom. In the spring, they have a ton of bulbs, which are really pretty as well. But if you kind of want to get the full effect of the garden, I would say August is probably the best month to visit. So I've gone there more times than I can count. We became members a few years ago. I think last year we tried to go every year, or not every year, we tried to go every month last year, and I think we made 10 out of 12 months. This year we haven't gone as much, but I'd say maybe once every 2 months, and it's really nice to go and see how much has changed kind of month over month, or even year over year. They're actually doing some big renovations right now to it as well. Other than Chicago, I've also been to the Botanic Garden in Naples, Florida. We were just there, was it this year, January or February? Escaping the cold weather, and it was really nice. I think that's the second largest botanic garden that I've been to, and it was really nice to see the difference because they can obviously grow a lot of different plants in Florida than we can grow up here in Chicago. So the Naples Botanic Garden in Florida was absolutely beautiful. I've been to the Michigan City Botanic Garden, which is near my hometown, so it's Michigan City, Indiana. That was a lot larger than I expected. It's not quite as densely planted with like annuals and stuff, but there's really nice little areas of flowers. It's kind of like a nice little hiking in the woods feel, which is very different from like the Chicago or the Naples Botanic Garden. So I do recommend that. What else have I been? I've been to Chapel Hills Botanic Garden when we were there for a wedding. Basically, anytime we travel anywhere, I search for botanic gardens nearby or gardens and cat cafes nearby, and we always try to find the ones there to go to. So I guess that's it. Has it really only been 4 different botanic gardens? I guess it has, unless I'm forgetting one, but definitely recommend anytime you're traveling somewhere, search for botanic gardens nearby and see what comes up. Next is, what would your dream garden look like? And this question is really hard because I think when I first read that, my immediate thought went to, I'd like to have a huge piece of land and a huge garden. But then when I think into the actual logistics of it, which maybe I shouldn't do if it's supposed to be a dream garden, I don't know if I would want to have a garden that large to maintain. I really like, I mean, even though there's times where I wish I had more space, I really like that my garden is a bit smaller. It's just a lot less work overall, but it really makes me focus on the plants that I love the most. So I would say it's difficult. I really love the garden space I have now. I think my ideal garden, just kind of the ones I'm drawn to, like at the Chicago Botanic Gardens, for example, I'm really drawn to what's called the English Wall Garden. So they have a lot of like old stone walls, there's a fountain, there's a bunch of roses climbing up or other plants climbing up the walls. So I think something that kind of feels like that, more like a secret garden. If you've ever watched The Secret Garden from, I think it was the 90s, a movie I saw as a kid and recently as an adult, but I really like gardens that are kind of like cozy little spaces. So I think that would be my dream garden, something that kind of feels like an old, like secret English walled garden. I do kind of get the same cozy vibes up here, especially because, you know, we have the brick walls, which kind of makes it feel like a secret garden. I mean, if you walk by on the sidewalk, you have no idea all of the stuff that I'm growing up here. So that was everything from the community tab. Now going into the questions on the video. So this kind of goes into the last question, but do you have any plans to move to a place with land so you can do in-ground gardening? So right now, no. Like I mentioned, we actually own our home now, so that's really exciting. And we just moved in 2020. So I don't have any plans to move. I spent so much of my time moving and packing up and moving and packing up as I was renting different apartments that I don't want to move anywhere for at least a decade. And I feel like everyone says this, but I really like living in a city. I like being able to walk to places. I mean, I can walk from here like to Lake Michigan in maybe like 45 minutes. I can walk anywhere I need to go. And I really love that, but I feel like that's kind of what everyone says until they either have kids or want more space and then they move out of the city. So who knows if we'll actually stay in the city kind of permanently or if we will ever move outside of it. But I do know there are also places in the city as well where you can get a little bit of land. But I think if I was ever going to move somewhere with land, I would like a bit more land than probably what's available inside of the Chicago city limits. So as of right now, no plans to move anywhere from here. I don't want to ever have to box up my kitchen ever again if possible. But again, who knows what the future is going to bring. Next is, what caused you to get into gardening? So I always knew that I wanted to have a garden, and that is because when I was really little, I have a lot of memories of helping my grandpa in his garden. So he lived in Maryville, Indiana, and I know it was more like a neighborhood suburb type place. In my mind though, his garden was like acres big, but I know that realistically that's not possible for where they lived at the time. So I have memories like walking up and down the rows, specifically, and this is why I have 2 rhubarb plants. He would cut me a stalk of rhubarb and let me chew on that. We would bring the rhubarb in and my grandma would make strawberry rhubarb pie. So there's just a lot of happy memories around that. Also growing up kind of in my house, so my mom had a little area of flowers that like we would switch out for the different seasons or holidays. I had a raspberry bush behind our shed, which is again why I have raspberry bushes now. We had an apple and a pear tree. I know we had a pear tree. Do we have 2 pear trees? And then my neighbors had a bunch of cherry trees. So I always have those really fun memories of growing up around gardens, being able just to like pick off a pear or pick some raspberries and eat them right there. And I definitely knew that I wanted to have that as an adult. Now I've been in Chicago for 10 years, a little bit over 10 years now. And I always thought I would have to wait to have a garden until I had a yard. But obviously, that is untrue based on what I now have. I didn't have any outdoor space in my first apartment. And then kind of as I moved around, I realized how important outdoor space was to me, especially when we have a limited amount of time of really nice weather to be outside here. So I think, if I'm remembering correctly, every time I moved, my outdoor space like got a little bit larger and a little bit larger until we have the decks that we have now, which are about 18 by 19 square feet. And in Chicago, I mean, that's a huge amount of space. So I feel really lucky. And then I think I actually started on one of the smaller decks with like a few pots, but I'd say 2019 is when I really started being a gardener, or having a garden large enough to really call it a garden. Next question is, what is something you learned from container gardening that surprised you? And the first thing that comes to mind is that you can grow anything in a container. I definitely thought there would be limitations as far as like what plants you just cannot do in a container, but as long as your container is large enough, you can pretty much grow anything, as long as it, you know, kind of fits in with your growing zone. But I don't have space for this, but we were in a restaurant earlier this year and they're growing full-grown trees indoors in very, very large containers. Containers that would be too large for me to A, bring up here, and B, would definitely cause the deck to collapse under that weight. But even walking around here, you can kind of see on people's rooftops like trees poking over, so you know they have small trees up there. A lot of people have evergreens, smaller evergreens up here as well. So that was something I don't think I realized, is that if you have this space in your container, you can grow almost anything. I don't think there's anything I've come across yet that hasn't worked in a container that also works in the ground in Chicago. Now again, assuming that the plants that you're trying to grow correctly in this climate. So I think that's been the most surprising thing for me, is there aren't as many limitations as I thought as far as what different plants I can grow. Oh, and this was not planned, but leads very nicely into the next question. For outside, is there anything you wish you could grow but can't because of your zone? Not enough space or not the right conditions, etc. I definitely wish I could have a beautiful orange tree or passion fruit vine, and of course more blueberry bushes, but I already have 4 on my terrace. That is what I'm trying to prevent myself from doing with raspberries. We'll see how that goes. And then another question for inside that I will answer after that. So for outside, anything I wish I could grow but can't. I think it's the same as you, more citrus. I love grapefruit, I love oranges. I have my one lemon tree that I'm looking at right now that I moved inside, and it's losing its leaves as it always does inside. So you can have citrus and you can move them in and out throughout the season, but I mean, I know that this lemon tree is not as happy in Chicago as it would be down in Florida. So it's kind of one of those things where I'm forcing it into my climate, but I just know it's not as happy as it would be somewhere else. So I would love to have more citrus trees outside. I would also love to have, kind of where I was saying before, like more fruit trees, which I'm looking into some smaller varieties, but I think the large ones, we have too much wind up here and I can see that causing a lot of damage. So I would have to have a really heavy pot and a lot of protection, or more protection than I have right now, I think, to keep fruit trees, taller ones, happy outside. So that's kind of something that if I can find some dwarf variety fruit trees, if you know of any, let me know down below. But I wish I had a better climate for growing things up here that wouldn't be completely destroyed in the strong winds that we get here. And then the next question, part 2 of that, was for inside. Would love to know, what are some of your wish list houseplants? And I'm in kind of an odd place with houseplants right now. So when I first started buying houseplants, and this probably happens with a lot of people, I went a little bit houseplant crazy and got as many plants as possible without really knowing where they would grow the best, what kind of care they needed, not even really knowing sometimes what they were before I got them. And then I realized I was ending up with just a bunch of plants laying around everywhere, and not really having a specific place. I think I kind of went over this talking about us redoing this room this winter. So they were kind of just like scattered everywhere, but not really having a best place for them. And so it kind of became a bit overwhelming. So now I don't know if I actually have any wish list plants for inside. I feel like I have a lot for outside, but I'm kind of happy with the plants that I have right now. Like behind me here, this is both pothos and philodendron vines, which aren't the most exciting plant. I don't think they're like on the top of a lot of wish list plants for people, but they really fit this space nicely for what I want the plant to add to the decor. So that's kind of what I'm more focused on now. But I will say I basically love any plant that's pink. So if there's a pink plant, I will buy it, but I don't want to get anything that's too expensive or rare because that would stress me out too much to try to keep it alive. So this wasn't part of the question, but my favorite plants that I have are the pink ones. So it's my ruby rubber tree plants, which I have 2 of, and then my variegated string of hearts, which I don't think love the amount of light that we get here as much as they would in other locations that had more sunlight. But my favorite plants are pink, but I don't think I actually have any like wish list houseplants right now, which is odd to say because that's definitely a change from just a couple of years ago. Next question is, I think there's actually a few questions here, so I'll go through each of them separately. So when did you realize you love gardening? When I was little. It was just so much fun being outside. It's almost magical, even though I guess people live this way throughout the majority of history, to know that you can just like go outside and grab something and eat it. You know, now we often go into the grocery store, things that have traveled, you know, from different countries to be here, but just the ability to plant one tiny seed and get hundreds of tomatoes from that one tiny seed is incredible to me. So I think as a kid that really seemed magical, and actually as an adult, it still seems magical as well. So I've loved it ever since I was helping my grandpa in his garden. The next question in this list is, does anyone in your family garden? So my grandpa did, my grandparents have passed, my mom did as well, but now she's older, and I think that's kind of something that happens when you get older. You want less maintenance, less work required, so she doesn't have a separate garden anymore, and I don't have any siblings. So I guess I am the only person in my family that gardens, which is weird to think about. I do have extended family, so I know that like my aunts and uncles have their gardens as well. They have yards, so they can garden in a yard, so that's always nice to see. One of my aunts has really beautiful landscapes and like a lot of whimsical decorations that her husband makes. So I do have some extended family that gardens, but no one in my immediate family gardens anymore. The next part of this question is, how do you keep things organized, like a planner or a spreadsheet? So I use a combination, I'd say, of 3 main things. So I do use a couple spreadsheets. The 2 spreadsheets that I use the most often, I have one where I've just listed out all the information for specifically my perennial plants, the ones that I know I have in my garden year after year, just so I remember like when I started them, how often they need to be fertilized, because typically those don't need to be fertilized on as regular of a schedule as my perennials, if they need a soil acidifier, any other amendments that they might need. So I have a spreadsheet with my perennials in it. I also have a spreadsheet for seed starting. So I list out every year all of the seeds that I have, and then there's some formulas in there that'll tell me, based on my average last frost, when do I need to start the seeds? Do I start them indoors or outdoors? And that's another one I have a video for, and actually have a link in that video description to a public version of the spreadsheet if that's something you would want to use. So I will link that video down below so that you can see how I use it and then try out the spreadsheet if you want to. And then another thing that I use on a regular basis other than spreadsheets is Google Calendars. So Google Sheets I have, not downloading them to Excel, but keeping them in Google Sheets so I can access them anywhere. Same thing with Google Calendar. So for that, I really use that for reminders. So like weekly fertilizing of my annuals, when I need to apply the acidifier, I'll put a reminder for that in my calendar so that I know it's coming up. I also have to put a reminder to water my plants, my house plants, because I forget about them basically during the garden season. And so I need that reminder to say, hey, today's the day you need to check your house plants and see if they need to be watered. And then the last thing that I use kind of on a regular basis for planning is the From Seed to Spoon app. So I've had a few different garden planning apps, but that's the one that I keep coming back to. It was actually one of the first accounts that I followed on Instagram when I started getting into gardening more, because I saw other people recommending it. And I use that mostly for my cool weather crops, because I feel like I'm pretty on top of my plants in the summer, like when things are ready to harvest. But for cool weather crops, I often forget when I sowed them, what I sowed, which container I put them in. So I do use that, and I basically just record what I've sown, and then that'll keep track of how many days until they're ready to harvest. So I really like the From Seed to Spoon app just for a little bit more organization. I tend not to label my plants, even though I really should, like in the actual garden. So that helps to remember what specific varieties I'm growing. So those are the three things I'd say I use for scheduling: is Google Spreadsheets, Google Calendar, and then the From Seed to Spoon app. The next question in here is, who on YouTube, Instagram, elsewhere has inspired you the most? And I think I forgot that there was a part 2 of one of the other questions about which YouTubers I follow. So I do follow other garden YouTubers. I feel like everyone probably has the same answer, but Garden Answer is the one that inspires me the most, even though her garden is a lot larger than mine and she does a lot of things that I cannot do. But I think I first found her because I was searching for how to grow hydrangeas in containers, and she did a video on it, and then I kind of got like sucked into all of her videos. So now I feel like I do get some inspiration, but I'm mostly following for like entertainment and seeing her beautiful greenhouse and everything she's doing in it. But she does have some really good instructional videos as well. I would definitely YouTube, like if you have any questions on how to do something in the garden, search for it on YouTube. I like following videos better than articles. So she's the main one I watch. I also watch The Impatient Gardener. I really like her, and I think she's really funny. And she has, even though it's a little colder there, she has a more similar climate to me in Chicago than I feel like Garden Answer has. And then there's a lot, I mean, I follow a lot of people. I would say Klaus Dalby, as far as bulbs specifically in containers. I mean, he is the person that I follow as far as how to do it. And the one time I didn't follow everything he said is when my bulbs rotted. So I probably should have just done what he does. So I try to find photos that I really like, and then I'll follow that account because I assume they're going to post a lot more similar things on their account. But I mean, I follow hundreds of gardeners. I definitely follow more gardeners on Instagram than I do on YouTube. TikTok, I'm trying. I have an account. I post there sometimes. I feel like there's already too many social media platforms for me to like remember to check on a regular basis. So I haven't really done a lot on TikTok yet as far as finding people to follow. But I like longer form content because, again, mostly what I'm looking for is how to do something. And I need more than like 15 to 30 seconds of information there. So I definitely do more YouTube and Instagram. YouTube more for like instructional type of information, and then Instagram for a lot of like inspirational type of photos and reels on there to know what I can do in my garden. And then the last question in this section is, what is your favorite flower of all time? Ooh. So I don't know which one. I'll tell you my two favorite, and then maybe I can figure out which one is my actual favorite. So I love dahlias just because they're so beautiful. Like, they're one of the most beautiful flowers. They get so large, most of them. So I would say more the dinner plate dahlias, but I feel like that's the one that always catches my attention when I'm walking through a garden is a dahlia. So probably if we're just going on looks, dahlias. If we're going on productivity, zinnias / gomphrena. More zinnias though, because I like using those in bouquets the most inside, and they just last forever. So if we're going in looks, dahlias. If we're going on productivity, zinnias. And we're probably more going on looks, so probably dahlias overall is my favorite. And I think that is actually the end of the list of questions that I had. I do feel like there's a lot more gardeners on YouTube that I follow, a lot more people that inspire me than I can think of off the top of my head. So down below in the description, I'll list the videos that I have for more of the specifics as far as fertilizing and the seed starting spreadsheet. And I'll also list down there some of my favorite accounts. It's not going to be a complete list, but some of the ones that I find myself either watching or checking their Instagram the most often. But this was really fun. If there are any more questions, or if I somehow missed one, let me know down below and I'll answer it in the comment section, or if I get enough, then I'll probably do a whole other video. But this has been really great. So thank you so much for leaving your questions, and I will see you in the next video.